The village was old, ancient. Houses huddled together, whispering secrets on the wind. And at the edge of the village, on a hill overlooking the rooftops, stood the house. Dark, silent, empty. No one dared to go near it. The house had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Some said it was cursed, others said it was haunted. Everyone agreed on one thing: it was a place of darkness. The villagers told stories about the house, stories about the family who used to live there, stories about their sudden disappearance. No one knew what had happened to them, but everyone knew their fate was tied to the house on the hill. Mark was new to the village. He didn't believe the stories. He thought they were just silly superstitions. One night, a group of teenagers were hanging out in the village square. They were talking about the house. They dared Mark to spend the night there. Mark laughed. He wasn't afraid of an old house. He agreed to the dare. He knew he would regret it later, but something inside him, some deep, primal instinct, urged him toward the danger that awaited. The night was stormy. Rain lashed down, driven by a howling wind. Lightning flashed across the sky, momentarily illuminating the house on the hill. Mark made his way up the muddy path. With each step, the wind came, urging him onward. The front door creaked open as if inviting him inside. Mark stepped into the house. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The storm raged outside, but inside the house there was an eerie silence. He took a deep breath and walked further into the house. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. He ran his fingers along the wall, feeling the rough texture of the crumbling plaster. A sudden gust of wind slammed a door shut behind him and he jumped. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. He could have sworn he heard a whisper, but when he listened again, there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the beating of his heart. He continued to explore the house. Each room was as dark and empty as the last. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of his vision. The silence was broken only by the creaking of the house and the pounding of the rain on the windows. He reached the top of the stairs. The hallway was long and dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through the grimy windows. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He was starting to regret his decision to come here. He walked down the hallway, his hand trailing along the wall. The air grew colder and he felt a shiver run down his spine. He stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, and he could see a faint light emanating from within. Mark pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and dusty, with a single window boarded up against the storm. The faint light he had seen was coming from a fireplace where a few embers still glowed. And in the center of the room, catching the light of the fire, was a mirror. It was a large, ornate mirror with a silver frame that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. Mark felt drawn to it. He took a step closer. As he looked at the mirror, he realized that it wasn't reflecting the room around him. It was reflecting something else, something dark and sinister, something that made his blood run cold. A face appeared in the mirror, a woman's face. She was beautiful, with long flowing hair and piercing blue eyes, but her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes were filled with an unspeakable sadness. Mark gasped and stumbled backward. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. He was transfixed by the woman in the mirror. He could feel her eyes boring into his, as if she were looking deep into his soul. "Help me," she whispered. Her voice was soft and low, but it seemed to echo through the room, chilling him to the bone. Mark wanted to run, but his feet felt as if they were rooted to the spot. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He tried to tear his gaze away from the mirror, but he couldn't. He felt a cold hand close around his wrist, and he knew that he was trapped. The woman in the mirror reached out, her hand seeming to pass through the surface of the glass. Her fingers were long and pale, and her touch sent a shiver down his spine. She was so close now that he could feel her breath on his cheek. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice a low moan that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. Her grip on his wrist tightened, and Mark felt a surge of terror wash over him, threatening to consume him entirely. "Who are you?" he managed to stammer. His voice barely a whisper. He tried to pull away, but her grip was too strong. He felt a cold dread creeping into his heart, spreading through his veins like ice water. "I am trapped," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "Trapped in this house, trapped in this mirror. Help me to be free." Her eyes, filled with a desperate longing, held his gaze, pleading with him for something he didn't understand. He wanted to help her, he really did, but he didn't know how. He didn't understand what she wanted from him. "How can I help you?" he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. The woman in the mirror smiled sadly. "Tell my story," she whispered. "Tell everyone what happened here. Don't let me be forgotten." Her grip on his wrist loosened, and her image in the mirror began to fade. And then she was gone. The mirror was empty, reflecting only the dark and dusty room. Mark stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He could still feel the coldness of her touch on his skin. He backed away from the mirror, his eyes never leaving its surface. Then he turned and ran. He ran out of the room, down the hallway, and out of the house, not stopping until he reached the safety of the village. The next morning, the villagers found Mark's shoes at the edge of the woods. They searched for him for days, but they never found a trace of him. Some whispered that he had run away, too scared to face the consequences of his dare. Others, however, believed that the house had claimed another victim. They said that Mark had been taken by the same force that had taken the family who had lived there all those years ago. They said that he was now trapped in the house with them, doomed to wander its halls for eternity. No one dared to go near the house now. Not even the bravest of the villagers would venture up the hill, not after what had happened to Mark. The house stood there, silent and watchful, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within its walls. And so the house remained empty, its secrets hidden behind its crumbling walls. But on stormy nights, when the wind howled and the rain lashed down, the villagers would sometimes hear whispers coming from the house on the hill, whispers that seemed to speak of a young man trapped within its walls, whispers that pleaded for someone, anyone, to help them to be free. And the villagers would huddle in their homes, drawing their curtains tight against the storm, and pray that they would never meet the same fate as Mark.